times where a movie gets released in theaters and then it becomes such a financial and critical smash, and then the next thing you know, the movie that you have raved for days gets an unnecessary sequel years later? Yeah, this is kind of one of those times. Yes, everyone, at this day and age, we have seen this kind of filmmaking trend for decades on end, where a movie that has become so incredibly popular and successful at the box office gets an unnecessary sequel with it. For example, after the success of the amazing action movie in the 1980s, Predator, there was an unnecessary sequel that came along with it called Predator 2. Same thing with Dumb and Dumber. After the success of the first one, there came Dumb and Dumber 2. And now this year, bafflingly enough, we get a sequel to the very first Sicario movie, which didn't even get a wide release in theaters, which is known as Sicario, Day of the Soldado. Now, when I heard that they were making a sequel to the first Sicario movie, I was supremely skeptical. Mostly because of the fact that I really enjoyed the first Sicario. Despite the movie's flaws of having a few pacing issues and a plot that, in all honesty, isn't entirely special and nothing that we haven't seen before, it was still a well-made, beautiful-looking movie with fantastic cinematography by Roger Deakins, very excellent editing, very fantastic use of tension, as well as giving us superb performances from the likes of Emily Blunt, Josh Brolin, and Benicio del Toro, who was pretty much the highlight of the first movie. And the first Sicario movie was directed by none other than Denis Villeneuve, who has been known for directing such amazing movies like Prisoners, Arrival, and of course, one of the best films of last year, the sci-fi masterpiece known as Blade Runner 2049. But now, for Sicario Day of the Soldado, the game has been changed a little bit. Instead of Denis Villeneuve at the director's chair, it's been given to Silvano Salima instead, who is known for directing television shows. And while it did make sense for Emily Blunt to not be in this movie because of the events of the first one, the sequel does bring back once again Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro as Matt Reaver and Alejandro. So the question must be asked, how does Sicario Day of the Soldado compare with the first one? Well, like always, let's dig into the plot. In Sicario Day of the Soldado, the conflict between the US military and the Mexican cartel still rages on. And this time, things are about to get immensely grievous when a bunch of suicide bombers who were sent by the Mexican cartel to cross over the border to commit a suicide bombing act in Kansas City. So the Secretary of Defense gives a task to Matt Reaver, played by Thanos himself, Josh Brolin, to finish off these terroristic acts committed by the Mexican cartel once and for all. To it, Matt Reaver reunites once again by Alejandro, played once again by Benicio del Toro, to kidnap a cartel kingpin's daughter, played by Isabella Moner. That way they can ensue a war where multiple cartels are against each other. But then things get a little bit complicated when Matt Reaver and Alejandro have their consciousness tested on how to continue on and to resolve the mission. So what do I personally think of Sicario Day of the Soldado? Personally, I would kind of summarize it like this. This movie is serviceable, suitable, and enjoyable, but ultimately quite unnecessary. It's a movie that, while it is completely unnecessary, that ultimately becomes not amazing, not atrocious, but serviceable. I'll start off by saying that the acting is very great in this movie, primarily with the main heavy hitters being Josh Brolin and Benicio del Toro. These two guys right here work incredibly well with each other. The chemistry between each other is fantastic and fierce, and pretty much any suspenseful scene that has to do with people talking to one another pretty much involves these two. There's literally a scene towards the climax of the movie between the two characters, and you are immediately taken in by the performances, and you look at it and you go, okay, this is getting incredibly tense. How is this gonna go down? What's the character gonna do? And it was pretty much one of those elements that worked in the first Sicario movie. I'm telling you guys, Josh Brolin is having one heck of a year. First with Thanos, now with Cable, now he is in Sicario 2, and he delivers one of the most fiercest performances of the year. In this movie, he holds no punches, and he will do whatever it takes to get the mission done. And you can see it in his performances, like in some cases a scene where he's interrogating a suspect. You can literally see that he means absolute business. And Benicio del Toro, who is one of the most interesting aspects of the first movie, he also delivers a very fantastic performance. There are also some characters who were in the first Sicario who are in this movie, and they actually do a very good job in their roles. And there are also new characters who come into this sequel as well. You have Isabella Moner, who I recently seen her as the little girl in the extremely terrible Transformers The Last Night. She also does a good job in the movie, and she's pretty much the one character who kind of has an arc in this movie. She's the one character who thinks that she's pretty much invincible because her father is the kingpin of a cartel. You even seen it in scenes where she's at a school and she's fighting with another person, and the teacher is attempting to expel the girl, and she's like, do it. I dare ya. Because you can see that she's pretty much invincible, and when she's out in the battlefield, she's not as invincible as she thinks she is. Like when she gets intercepted with the firefight and she's in absolute danger. She's pretty much just a little kid in a situation. And in moments like when her character grows along with Benicio del Toro's character, those type of scenes of characters having conversations with each other really do make the character at some points grow. And you know what? Despite being a television show director, Stefano Sollima does a very solid job with the direction. He does a very good job at capturing the atmosphere that Denis Villeneuve did in the first movie, where it shows how potentially ruthless the Mexican cartel area could be, and how it's supposed to be, as Benicio del Toro's character would put it, a land of the wolves. And speaking of elements in the first Sicario movie that Denis Villeneuve did, the action sequences are virtually realistic. The action scenes in the movie make you feel like you're there. When it comes to the kidnapping of the Kingpin's little girl, it doesn't feel supremely staged. It ultimately feels like an actual kidnapping is happening. There are also some tension-filled scenes that are quite similar to the first Sicario movie, one of them involving a convoy of cars, and while it does seem a little bit familiar, it's still entertaining nonetheless when it comes down to it. And while there are pros to the movie, there are definitely cons. One of the things that make Day of the Soldado pretty much weaker to the first one is that it has a bit of an identity crisis. It just feels like that a bunch of premises were mixed into this one script, and then you get Day of the Soldado. Like, first off, it starts off being your typical Sicario movie, and then all of a sudden it becomes an escort and defend movie, which I was pretty much thinking that's pretty much the best part of the whole movie. Another thing that I kinda have with it is that there are some plot elements that are seen from the first movie that are immediately rehashed in this one. There are some elements like Alejandro saying to the little girl, "You remind me of my daughter." Wait a minute, didn't you say that before to Emily Blunt in the first movie? And basically that scene where he reminded him of his daughter was kind of important and provided a bit of special character development to Emily Blunt. Here it ultimately feels like, hey, there was a side plot that worked in this movie, why not put it in here? Taylor Sheridan, who was known for writing the first Sicario movie in Hell or High Water, is now writing this movie, which was one of the reasons why I was still kind of looking forward to the movie. And usually what we have seen when he's writing a movie is that he implements a message into the film. In the first Sicario, he illustrates the absolute horror of the Mexican cartel. And what made it work was that Emily Blunt was the audience's POV, and we were trying to wonder what we're getting ourselves into. In his directorial debut of Wind River, it establishes the tragedy of Native American women being kidnapped by other people and how Native Americans are being treated by the authorities. In this movie, it shows the political side of things where children are being subjected into cartels. But they just ultimately feel like that the second one was repeating story elements from the first Sicario. You know the side plot in the first movie where there's like this corrupt cop who's actually a cartel member? Where not only do you see his personal life and background, like the fact that he has a family, and the son who really cares about the dad really wants to play soccer with him, and it becomes supremely interesting when the subplot and the main plot intersect with each other. In this movie, we see a life of a teenage boy who is working with members of the cartel, just trying to cross people over the border. But the thing about that is that not only do you not care about the character or find his plot interesting, but ultimately it leads to the final act just being completely interesting at first. And that ultimately leads to one of my biggest problems of Sicario Day of the Soldado. The last act is supremely underwhelming. First of all, when the movie approaches its climax, there is this very important character who gets shot. And when you watch it, you're like, okay, that's pretty incredibly bold. Good job right there. And you can see from that point on, the plot gets a little bit interesting, and then it stops being that, only to realize that the character who was shot was alive all along. And then all of a sudden, the movie says 1 year later, and I swear to you guys, it sequel baits itself. I was like, seriously? We have seen scenes of brutal shootouts and just deadly grimness and just a dark atmosphere, and this was the payoff? It was one of those bait and switches that completely makes this movie a little bit of a letdown. But with that being said, I do have to say that Sicario Day of the Soldado, while flawed, it is still watchable and a bit entertaining. The direction is very solid, the action scenes and some scenes of suspense really do sell the movie a lot. There are some plot elements that were rehashed from the first movie that feel a bit repetitive. It kind of has an identity crisis. And the last act, while it does get incredibly bold, it stops doing that and then it just becomes silly and then it sequel baits itself at the end. So with that being said, I would have to give Sicario Day of the Soldado a 3 out of 5. This isn't exactly a must-see, but I do have to say that it's worth a recommendation. Alright everyone, that was my review of Sicario Day of the Soldado. Comment below, let me know what you thought about this movie. Find me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+. And also, if you want to see more reviews like this, be sure to subscribe for more. My name is Luke Nukem, and you, my amigos, have been blown away.